"You are obviously unbalanced and paranoid," Dennis Caldwell stated, smiling patronizingly at merchants who questioned his bills while reclining in his leather recliner. I held a manila folder with enough proof to ruin his career as I stood in his corner office in Denver, Colorado, saying, "Nobody will believe a word you say." I could hear the distant hum of our accounting department finishing up another day at Gravora Group, the mid-sized manufacturing business where I had spent the last 12 years of my life, as the late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his mahogany desk. Despite the adrenaline pumping through my veins, I responded gently, "Dennis, the numbers don't lie," maintaining a steady tone of voice. His laugh was harsh and contemptuous as he said, "The pension fund is missing $200,000, and every withdrawal traces back to your authorization codes." My jaw tightened at the condescending tone. "Monica, you've been under a lot of stress lately. Maybe you should take some time off, get your head straight." I was 46 years old, with over 10 years of experience managing payroll and employee benefits with no inconsistencies, and he was acting like a crazy kid. However, I could see by the look in his eyes that this talk was going to go in a very different direction than I had anticipated. Continuing, I opened the folder and showed him the printed spreadsheets. "I've triple-checked everything," I said. "The quarterly audit flagged these transactions, and when I dug deeper—" "What?" Dennis jumped up suddenly, his cheeks hot in the face. "You went digging through confidential financial records without authorization? That's a serious violation of company policy." My heart began to race, Monica, but it was out of rage rather than fear. This individual had been embezzling money from our employees' retirement accounts, money that belonged to people like Carlos in maintenance, who had been making consistent contributions for 8 years, or Janet in shipping, who was 3 years away from retirement. He even had the gall to reverse this for me. I maintained a steady voice as I stated, "Those records are part of my job responsibilities. Managing the pension fund distributions falls under—" Picking up his phone, Dennis said, "Not anymore, it doesn't." The word terminated struck me like a blow to the body. "Security? Yes, I need an escort to human resources. We have a terminated employee who needs to be walked out immediately." I had never even been given a written warning in my whole tenure at Gravora Group. I always received great performance reports. 2 years prior, I had detected a significant payroll error that had saved the company $50,000. Now, I was being dismissed because I had found out about his embezzlement. But I noticed something crucial as I saw Dennis smiling contentedly as he hung up the phone. He had just made a grave error. 20 minutes later, a stony-faced security guard observed me every step of the way while I cleared up my desk. As I crammed 12 years of my career into a cardboard box, the whole accounting department fell silent, watching me closely. Dennis possessed. I was being fired due to performance problems and a breach of confidentiality procedures, which portrayed me as an unreliable worker who had gone too far. I could see the bewilderment on my coworkers' faces. My best buddy from work, Jennifer, kept looking confusedly between Dennis's office and me. Just yesterday we had lunch together, and I had appeared to be doing just well. Even Janet from shipping came over to check on me, her worn hands softly touching my shoulder. I told her quietly, "I'm okay." Even though I was packing my personal belongings and my hands were trembling a little. She nodded, not comprehending the deeper meaning of what I was saying, but something in my tone made her swear she would. "Just take care of yourself, Janet. Make sure you keep track of your pension statements, all right?" I asked. No one in that office, including Dennis, was aware that I had been bracing myself for this possibility ever since I saw the differences 3 weeks prior. In addition to my accounting experience, I had volunteered for the Colorado Financial Ethics Advisory Board for 5 years, assisting small firms in putting in place appropriate supervision practices. I made connections with federal regulators and forensic accountants who focused on pension fraud cases as a result of that work. Above all, I had developed an investigative mindset, Dennis had discarded the manila folder with such assurance. But that was only a small portion of what I had discovered. I had spent weeks carefully constructing an encrypted drive that held the actual proof. All questionable transactions, faked authorizations, and attempts to hide his identity were recorded, cross-checked, and backed up in several safe places. Dennis came out of his office as I was carrying my box of stuff to the elevator, presumably to confirm that I had indeed left the premises. I looked at him, and he smiled at me with that same patronizing look. I stopped walking and turned to face him as he cried out, "Monica?" loud enough for half the office to hear. "I hope you understand this is for the best. Sometimes people just aren't cut out for positions of responsibility." Now that everyone in the department was watching us, I could feel the pressure of their scrutiny. I briefly thought about revealing to everyone the exact type of man they were working for, but I had a better idea. "You're absolutely right, Dennis," I murmured, my eyes not seeing yours. The bewilderment that briefly crossed his face was quite rewarding. Sometimes people really aren't cut out for positions of responsibility. "Sure, just wait." I made the most significant phone call of my career that night while sitting in my home office in my small ranch house outside of Denver, looking at the cardboard box from my last employment. There was enough evidence on the encrypted device next to my laptop to put Dennis in federal jail. "I need to talk about a pension fraud case that's going to require federal involvement," I said when the forensic accountant responded. "It's Monica Delgado." Patricia Wong and I had collaborated on 3 separate cases during my tenure with the Ethics Board, and I had complete faith in her skills. How awful is our communication? I liked Patricia's tone, which was all business. The silence on the other end indicated that Patricia recognized the seriousness of the situation. $200,000 stolen from employee retirement funds over the past 18 months, possibly more, I said, bringing up the comprehensive spreadsheets on my laptop screen. The perpetrator is the chief financial officer of a mid-sized manufacturing company, and he terminated my employment today when I confronted him about it. "Monica, you must tell me whether you are positive about these figures." As I scrolled through the information I had gathered, I said, "I've examined them 7 different ways. The permission numbers are falsified, the transaction patterns are obvious, and I have documentation proving he created fake vendor accounts to channel the money through. This is intentional, systematic theft, not an error or carelessness." Patricia's sigh could be heard over the phone. "Obviously, send me whatever you have encrypted. And until we've had a chance to examine the evidence, Monica, don't discuss this with anybody else. We'll need to call in the Department of Labor's investigating section if this is as straightforward as you're portraying it." I called Thomas Rodriguez, a Department of Labor investigator I had met at a pension security workshop 3 years prior, after hanging up with Patricia. Thomas specialized in cases involving retirement fund misappropriation, and he had given me his direct number, instructing me to call him if I ever came across anything suspicious. "Thomas, this is Monica Delgado from the Colorado Ethics Board," I replied to him. "I need to report a significant pension fraud case, and I believe it falls under federal jurisdiction. Tell me what you've got." I could hear Thomas taking notes as I described the problem, and his inquiries grew more urgent and pointed as I brought up the dollar amount and the theft's methodical character. Thomas responded, "Monica, I need you to realize something," after I had completed my summary. "If what you're saying is true, this is a federal felony that impacts the retirement security of dozens of working families, not just embezzlement. The FBI will want to get this resolved as soon as possible." A cold satisfaction settled in my chest. Dennis had no idea that I had already started a chain of events that he couldn't halt, and he believed he could intimidate me into quiet by making my word untrustworthy. "When do we begin?" "I understand completely," I said to Thomas. I was seated in a sterile conference room at the Department of Labor's Denver field office 3 days after I had been fired. Special Agent Rebecca Foster of the FBI's White Collar Crime Division sat across from me, her keen eyes on the spreadsheets covering the conference table like a general studying battle plans, while Patricia Wong walked two federal investigators through the financial evidence I'd gathered. The majority of pension fraud investigations require months to gather this level of proof, but Agent Foster's voice carried the authority that made people pay attention. "This is exceptional documentation, Monica," she remarked. "How long did you keep an eye on these differences?" "About 3 weeks from start to finish," I answered, feeling strangely at ease in spite of the bizarre circumstances. Thomas Rodriguez, the Department of Labor investigator I'd contacted, leaned forward with interest. "What made you start looking in the first place?" Dennis wasn't particularly sophisticated in covering his tracks. He seemed to think his position would protect him from scrutiny. Once I found the pattern, it was just a matter of following the electronic trail. "Our quarterly audit flagged some unusual withdrawal patterns," I said, referring to the timetable I had made. "These transactions didn't match any of our documented employee requests, and while the amounts weren't huge individually, typically between $8,000 and $15,000, the frequency was incorrect. Pension fund distributions should follow predictable patterns based on employee retirement schedules and emergency hardship applications." "And when you confronted your supervisor about these discrepancies?" asked Agent Foster, who was looking at her colleague, Agent David Chen. Not being able to control my voice, I said, "He terminated my employment within 24 hours, claiming that I was crazy and paranoid and that no one would believe me. Then, because of supposed performance problems and confidentiality concerns, he had security escort me out. A traditional form of intimidation," Agent Chen noted, taking notes for his file. "To damage the whistleblower's credibility, discredit them." Patricia looked up from the financial data she had been going over and said, "Monica, I need to ask about your access to these records. Unfortunately for Mr. Caldwell, he doesn't understand how federal investigations work. Were you permitted to carry out this degree of financial analysis?" "Absolutely," I replied firmly. "One of my main duties as an employee was to oversee pension fund distributions. My job description literally included doing quarterly audits, and I had complete administrative access to the retirement account systems." Dennis attempted to portray it as illegal access, but all of the searches and downloads were within the bounds of my approved job. "That's essential for the integrity of the evidence," said Agent Foster with a nod of approval. "You also mentioned that you had records of fictitious vendor accounts." Taking another folder out of my briefcase, I saw that Dennis had set up 4 different shell companies with names that were similar to those of the real vendors we frequently deal with. Manufacturing was renamed Goldthorn Industries, Nexora. Labs was renamed Nexora Solutions, and he was hoping that the similarity would help him avoid being caught when processing regular payments. "What is the entire amount of money?" Agent Chen inquired. I answered, "I think it goes back further, but from what I could trace, about $230,000 over 18 months. Because of our document preservation standards, I was only able to evaluate records dating back 2 years, even though Dennis has been the CFO for 3 years. With a contemplative expression, Agent Foster got up and moved toward the window. "Monica, I want you to know that Dennis Caldwell will know exactly who supplied the evidence against him once this inquiry is over. Are you ready to face the prospect of reprisals?" I considered all the workers at Gravora Group who believed their futures were safe, including Janet from shipping, who was counting on her pension to retire in 3 years, and Carlos from maintenance, who was diligently contributing to a fund that Dennis was treating like his own bank account. "Agent Foster," I answered, steadfastly looking into her eyes. "I was previously fired by Dennis Caldwell for carrying out my duties. Can he harm me anymore?" I was consulting with the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit a week later when my phone buzzed with a chilling text message from my old accounting department coworker, Jennifer. "Monica, Dennis is telling everyone that you were sacked for embezzlement and that you stole money. He claims that you framed him by fabricating documents. Some individuals are beginning to accept it, Agent Foster saw the instant change in my expression. "What is it?" Her jaw tensed as she read the message, which I showed her. "He's trying to flip the narrative," she grumbled. "Classic deflection strategy. Accuse the accuser before they can gather support." "Is he capable of doing that?" In a panic, I questioned, "Is it possible for him to fabricate what happened and convince people of it?" Agent Foster said, "He can try. But he's making yet another crucial error. Every untruth he says about you or this case is more proof that he is aware of his culpability. Everything will be documented." Gravora Group's situation quickly worsened. Over the next few days, and Jennifer used careful texting to keep me informed about Dennis calling an all-hands meeting to address rumors and misinformation about the company's financial management. Dennis had portrayed me as a disgruntled employee who had made up evidence after being rightfully fired for poor performance. Dennis, however, had overlooked something very important: my standing with my old co-workers. "Most people aren't buying it," Jennifer wrote me on Thursday night. During the meeting, Janet from shipping posed some very good questions concerning the pension fund. According to Carlos from maintenance, he would like to look over his account statements. People recall your consistent honesty and caution. When I shared this information, Agent Foster explained that Dennis was attempting to plug holes in a dam that was already breaking, and that the announcement of the new system is evidence that he knows there are vulnerabilities in the current system, vulnerabilities he created to facilitate his theft. It was the real turning point. According to Jennifer, Dennis made his most serious mistake to date when he announced that the company would be switching to a new pension fund management system to prevent unauthorized access to employee accounts. He wasn't just stealing pension contributions, he was also skimming from the company's matching contributions. The total theft is approaching $300,000. That changes the federal sentencing guidelines significantly, said Agent Chen, adding that Patricia Wong had been working non-stop to verify every transaction I'd identified, and her preliminary findings were even more damaging than we'd initially suspected. We're now looking at potential charges under multiple statutes, including mail fraud, wire fraud, and violation of the Employee Retirement Income Security Act. But when Patricia tracked down the money Dennis had stolen, she found something far more calculated than evidence of gambling debts or personal financial issues. Patricia showed us bank records the FBI had obtained through court orders, explaining that Dennis wasn't spending the money on lifestyle expenses, but rather investing it in stock purchases, cryptocurrency, and real estate speculation, treating the pension fund like his personal investment portfolio. The calculating coldness of it made my stomach turn, but it wasn't desperation or addiction. It was pure greed. Dennis believed he could outperform the pension fund's cautious investing strategy by systematically stealing from diligent workers. Agent Foster, I replied, glancing at the evidence strewn across the conference table. When are you planning to proceed on this? The warrants are currently being finalized, she said, checking her watch. We'll carry them out tomorrow at 9 a.m., which is exactly when Dennis gets to work. In less than 12 hours, Dennis Caldwell was going to have the worst day of his career. I wasn't at Gravora Group on the morning of the raid, but I didn't have to be. Agent Foster had set me up to watch the operation from the FBI field office, where I could watch live video feeds from the agent's body cameras and give real-time instructions about the location of documents and the company's financial systems. I watched on several screens at precisely 9 a.m. as 12 federal agents in dark suits entered Gravora Group's main entrance. The receptionist's astonished look was evident as Agent Foster showed her the sealed warrant to search the building and take financial documents, and she asked, "Where is Dennis Caldwell's office?" Through Agent Chen's body camera, I saw them approach Dennis's office, where he was just getting settled with his morning coffee, likely planning another day of covering up his crimes and spreading lies about me, when he looked up and saw the federal agents. In about 3 seconds, his face changed from confusion to recognition to sheer terror. The receptionist pointed toward the corner office with a trembling hand. "Dennis Caldwell, said Agent Foster in a cool, collected tone. I'm FBI Special Agent Foster. The irony wasn't lost on me when Dennis's coffee cup fell out of his hands, splashing across his mahogany desk, and soaking the same financial reports he'd been looking over when I confronted him 2 weeks prior. We have a warrant to search these premises in connection with an investigation into pension fund fraud. Dennis stutteringly said, "There must be some error," his voice higher than normal. "I have no knowledge of pension fund theft. Isn't this about Monica Delgado?" "She was unstable, I told you. After we fired her, she made up evidence to get revenge." Agent Chen came forward with the warrant documents. "Mr. You have the right to say nothing, Caldwell, but we need you to leave your computer so our forensic team can secure your electronic devices." I saw Dennis's face go through a range of emotions through the video feed, including panic, desperation, and finally, defeated realization that his meticulously crafted lies were coming undone. The moment that satisfied me the most, however, was when Agent Foster questioned Dennis directly about the missing pension funds. The search of his office turned up even more evidence than we had anticipated, including handwritten notes detailing his shell company scheme, including passwords and account numbers he'd apparently been too cocky to properly hide, in addition to confiscating his computer and financial files. "Mr. Caldwell, could you explain the movement of over $300,000 in employee pension contributions to accounts under your supervision?" Dennis's answer was precisely what I had anticipated. "That isn't conceivable. There is no risk to the pension fund." I could hear the glee in Agent Foster's voice when she said, "Mr. Monica Delgado must have altered the records to make it appear that I was involved because she had unauthorized access to those systems. Caldwell, these transactions have been independently verified by forensic experts using the bank's own documentation. Additionally, we have records proving that you used your administrative credentials to personally approve each transfer. These aren't manipulated files. They're federal banking records." The silence that ensued was deafening. As the agents continued their search, word spread throughout the office, and I saw employees huddled in bewildered clusters whispering among themselves as they watched federal agents methodically dismantle Dennis's world. Janet from shipping stood near the elevator, her face a mixture of shock and growing understanding. The man who had called me paranoid and unstable was now being read his rights by the FBI while his office was searched for evidence of federal crimes. I sat in the federal courthouse in Denver 6 months later, watching Dennis Caldwell face the consequences of his actions. The courtroom was crowded with Gravora Group employees, many of whom had taken time off work to attend their former CFO's sentencing hearing. Dennis did not resemble the arrogant, self-assured man who had fired me. His expensive suits had been replaced by a simple gray outfit, and he stood before Judge Margaret Harrison with a gaunt face and slightly shaking hands. The federal investigation had turned up evidence of theft totaling over $400,000, far more than even I had suspected. Mr. Judge Harrison's voice carried the weight of federal authority as she remarked, "Caldwell, over the course of almost 3 years, you systematically stole from the retirement accounts of dozens of diligent employees." I watched Dennis's face as the judge went on, feeling a cold satisfaction as each word struck like a physical blow. "You broke the trust that was placed in you as a fiduciary, and when faced with evidence of your crimes, you tried to ruin the reputation and livelihood of the person who discovered your theft. Your acts reveal a deliberate disrespect for other people's financial stability and a readiness to harm people who rely on their pension payments to survive on a basic level. You are sentenced by the court to 3 years of supervised probation and 42 months in federal prison. Along with penalties and interest, you must also provide full restitution to the impacted pension fund." I didn't smile. I didn't gloat. I just met his gaze with the same steady calm I'd shown in his office that day and watched him disappear through the courthouse doors. As the bailiff led Dennis away in handcuffs, he turned one last time to look around the courtroom, and his eyes met mine across the crowded gallery, and I saw the moment he truly understood what had happened to him. The paranoid, unstable woman he dismissed had methodically documented his crimes and delivered him to federal justice. I had not expected the changes that followed Dennis's conviction. But a week after his sentencing, I was called by the Department of Labor's Office of Inspector General to accept a position as a senior investigator specializing in pension fraud cases. Director Sarah Matthews gave me a very thorough explanation of the Caldwell case during our phone interview, saying, "We need investigators who understand both the technical aspects of financial crimes and the human impact of retirement security. Theft. Would you be interested in making this kind of work your full-time career?" The irony was profound. Dennis had fired me for doing my job too well, and now the federal government wanted to hire me for precisely the same skills he'd tried to silence. The pattern was strikingly similar to Dennis's crimes, but I tackled it with federal authority and resources in my first case as a federal investigator. A construction company in Colorado Springs, whose owner had been using pension contributions to finance personal real estate investments. At Dennis's sentencing, Janet from shipping came up to me to personally thank me, saying, "You saved my retirement," her eyes full of tears. I was 3 years away from retiring, and if he'd kept stealing, I don't know what I would have done. Gravora Group had also put in place extensive reforms to prevent future pension fraud. The new CFO, who was brought in from outside the company, established multiple oversight layers and mandatory auditing procedures. Everything had been worth it after that talk. The tension, the argument, the brief unemployment, even Dennis's attempts to damage my name. All of my hardships had prepared me for this moment, defending working families against financial predators. Upon leaving the courthouse that day, I came to the realization that Dennis had been correct about one thing. No one would believe his word anymore, and not in light of federal evidence. As I became comfortable in my new position as a federal investigator, I frequently thought back on the convoluted journey that had brought me here, understanding that Dennis's attempt to silence me had only served to magnify my voice in ways he could never have predicted.